that you don't have to do that in private practice also, but just being more diligent and intentional about your time. Emergencies happen. You have to be flexible. Things come up. The environment can be unpredictable at times.
But like, were you in a high-paced, chaotic environment? Were you in an environment where there were fires all of the time? It's something in your nervous system that is almost like on a fight or flight response. That mentioned, if something isn't popping right now, something is wrong with me. Lack of control is usually why we leave, and income caps. You want to present yourself online as like an online business card, and it may be a reframe in your mind. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. And so we are doing a special this month, Mental Health Awareness Month, but we are shining light on mental health providers all over the country and talking about entrepreneurship. How do they take care of themselves when they are an entrepreneur? And of course, we're going to get into some juicy details about the journey within entrepreneurship, wins, and also growing pains. And so we are lucky to have one of our community members. Her name is Tanisha. I love to bring them on the screen so that we can truly introduce them in therapist fashion with what they're doing in the field and where they started. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Tanisha on. Great day.
Yes, good morning. Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good today. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes. So let's get this party started. And so I always like you all to introduce yourself with your title, where you're located, and the acronyms, because we know that the acronyms change state by state.
I'm Tanisha Fulcher, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in San Diego, California. And actually, I'm from San Diego, and so I'm back home now after finishing school. I have a private practice where I work with adults, and I also work part-time for another private practice as well.
Okay. Is it like a group practice that you work for, or just like one person?
Yes.
Okay.
Another group practice that provides exclusively online therapy.
Okay, nice. Okay, so you're in California. It's very rare that we have people on the podcast that are in California. Over the last 2 years, I get super excited as soon as I hear just like West Coast. If I hear somebody saying good morning, I automatically know you in the same time zone, because over 80% of our clients are not on the West Coast. They're all on the East. So it's refreshing. So, all right. So let's get started. So I know that you've had a lot of experience in doing different things in the field. And so what made you originally go into the mental health field to begin with?
That is an interesting question. Initially, my plan was to go into the medical field. So for undergrad, I went to Spelman College and my major was biochemistry. And my plan was to become either a neurologist or something along those lines. But as I went through my studies and had internships, I realized that I like to focus more on spending time with the patient and not so much the other side of it, even though I did have an interest in math and science. And so finally, I decided my junior year that I was going to, I made that decision to pursue that. So I didn't change my major. It was too late to do that. But I did start taking more psychology classes and then got into the MFT program at Northwestern. And so I just took it from there.
Nice. What was that transition like to go from going to school with classes focused on biology and everything else compared to going to college for psychology?
It was very different. So it just shifting my mind to think differently. And whereas with science, everything is more objective and factual. And then, with psychology, things are more subjective. And sometimes they're a bit abstract, but it was just thinking more so along the lines of more people-centered instead of, like objects. And it was definitely a big shift for me. And I'm glad that I did do it at least for a year to change before going into my master's program. Even going into my master's, I noticed there was a bit of an adjustment for me compared to my classmates who majored in psychology or something similar in undergrad. It was definitely a shift.
That's good I'm going to highlight that because we have like one video that did very well in terms of like, what does it take to become a clinical psychologist? And I get a lot of questions under there, even though I do answer the question in the video, but the main question that overlaps with like science compared to clinical work with people versus behind the scenes is, a lot of students ask us, what's the difference? And, the easiest way that I can explain it to them related to what you had mentioned, just so that people can see maybe even what part of their brain they're going to be using and what do they enjoy doing? Do they prefer being behind the scenes, doing research? Because, with a PhD, you can definitely do clinical work, but the coursework that will prepare you before you go out into the field, it's almost like the PhD may go into two phases, depending on their professors. And so like for those students who are listening or watching the podcast, the PhD is more research oriented. It doesn't mean you don't learn how to do mental health services, but you may have a lot more focus on the behind the scenes.
Academic science.
Versus clinical is we have a lot more courses on theoretical orientations and how to approach clients and of course the generalities of statistics and all those things. But I would only imagine if someone is very research based and then they go to internship, especially in a doctoral program, if they don't go to a research oriented internship, it's going to be a steep learning curve because they have to learn how to interact with people.
Yes.
Oh boy. Yes. I never thought about that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
wow.
Very much so. Very much so.
Okay.
Growing up, I've always had been driven to be like a peacemaker or a mitigator between groups of friends and the people that were close to me. And so I've always been curious just about human behavior and the motivation behind it. So that curiosity was always there, which I think helped me when having to adjust and shifting my thinking from this more science-based to psychology.
Right. That's good. So okay, let's fast forward. We went through school. What are some of the types of places, whether it be training or postgraduate, what types of places have you worked at in terms of like categories like hospitals, clinics?
So I have experience working at well, that's another thing. So initially I was a social worker with child welfare services or child protective services. I know it's different everywhere. And so that I was there for about 12 years. So that was my initial job out of school. After that, I've worked at high school as a therapist, mental health therapist. So that was a great experience. I enjoyed working in the school, and I had always wanted to work at a school. I've also worked in residential services with adolescents who were released from the psych hospitals, and they were there for about 30 to 60 days. So I have experience with that, and also working in private practice as a therapist as well as a program manager. So that was awesome experience too.
So let me ask, because I'm a professor of a quality assurance person at heart. And immediately I'm trying to picture like, oh my gosh, she's worked at some high risk facilities in terms of where people are coming from. It may not mean these people are super high risk, but the fact that someone was hospitalized, they're definitely at a level 3 or 4 in our world. And so what was it like to go from, because this is a lot of therapist question in terms of like private practice and we'll get into that in a moment, but like, what does it mean to go from high risk to regular functioning to a degree individuals who need help, but like the environments are completely different?
They are completely different. It's a different level of alertness. And when you are working in a facility or a setting where they're more high risk, you're definitely more alert, and you have to be more, not that you don't have to do that in private practice also, but just being more diligent and intentional about your time. And because, emergencies happen, you have to be flexible, things come up, and the environment can be unpredictable at times. And then when shifting to working in private practice with the more where their functioning is improved, the experience is different, and you're able to focus more on well-being and not so much on the risk management and monitoring for safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my brain is like firing off. I'm like, I'm gonna probably do a whole podcast episode on this because I'm like, it's going back to even what you talked about with college, like the switching. And so,
Yes.
I'm picturing like DTA students, right? And
Mhm.
a lot of their questions outside of like strategy and stuff, a lot of it is around like focus time, time management, and all those things. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
just thinking about the person who has gotten so used to, even if they were never this way, but they got so used to being in a very high, stressful, and chaotic
Mhm.
environment. And granted, being
Mhm.
flexible is a part of entrepreneurship. So it does
Yes.
definitely train you, right?
Yeah.
But
For
think
sure.
about it. You create your own schedule. You don't have people calling you at the wee hours of the night.
Mhm.
If you do like a,
Mhm.
what is it?
Yes, on
In
call.
the community, in home, like, you got a
Mhm.
caseload of 8 and they high
Mhm.
level, in a clinic. And so it's interesting because when I think about an entrepreneur that went from there to here, they actually
Mhm.
could have a hand in creating their own chaos. So
Yes.
it's almost like
Mhm.
because nothing is happening, nothing is happening. And I know
Right.
y'all probably
Yes.
talk about that, like things.
Yes.
I know you've been patient,
Oh
but
my
like some people
gosh.
are not patient. And I'm like, I wonder do they have a correlation
Yes.
with
Very
you
much
used
so.
to like fires?
Yes, I didn't even realize that. I experienced that even currently. That is something that is, and it's distracting because you have this feeling like, oh no, like what I should be doing something. What, even though I know what I should be doing, I have a list, I have a plan. Like I've
Yeah.
gone through DTA, I have my whole strategy, but I still get stuck with just like, oh my gosh, like what? Because I am so used to the fast pace,
Mm,
that it can feel uncomfortable when things slow down and you do have control over your schedule and having to make these decisions, and it's not being dictated by the environment or what's happening with the high risk environment that you're in.
yeah.
There is a shift there for sure.
That's crazy.
That is true.
Yeah, we'll have to
Yes.
come back to that, like in a whole other
Yes,
episode or
please
something. Oh
do.
my gosh.
Yes.
I'd be really curious to see. That would be a good poll. We need to write
Mhm.
that down, team. Like that would be a good poll of asking people what type of environment and let them like choose from a breakdown because they may not understand my question. But like, were you
Mhm.
in a high paced, chaotic environment? Were you in an environment
Mhm.
where you did not control your schedule? Were in an environment where there were fires all of the time? And that's probably why you didn't finish your
Mhm.
paperwork on time. And then when you come into your
Mhm.
practice, you think that all of a sudden you're going to become QA king or queen. You're going to do all,
Yeah.
even though we create the tools, it's something in your
Yes.
nervous system that is almost like on a fight or flight response. Where, as
Mhm,
you had
mhm.
mentioned, if something isn't popping right now, something is wrong with me.
Yes.
And that
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable to do nothing, or
Yes.
slow down. So that sounds intriguing.
Mhm.
Okay. We're gonna have to come back to
Yes.
that. All right.
You are
That'll be
on
a good
point with that.
conversation, the DPA. All right. All right. So you've worked at a good amount of places. And so when you were first exposed to private practice, being in someone else's practice, what made you
Mhm.
even choose to go in, start like what made you choose to start there and work in someone else's practice to begin with?
Well, that wasn't my first, place of employment, but, uh, well, I wasn't gonna tell on myself, but I was in a doctoral program for clinical psychology, and I needed an internship, and one of my professors had a private practice, and
Okay.
so that's how I got started with it. I haven't finished my dissertation, so I'm not gonna go there,
Yeah,
that's
we
pending.
okay.
But, so that's how I got started. So, but in school, I had never even thought about doing private practice. To me, that was always like a scary thing. Like, what, private practice? I don't know anything about having a business, or it's safer to just work at a hospital or work at a school. But I
Mhm.
needed an internship, so I called her. She was the best option. I was able to start there, and I thought it was just like 3 months prior to COVID. They
Okay.
were still kind of building it out. They only had a few therapists at that time, and then of course it exploded once COVID hit, and it was growing very quickly.
Mm,
And so it was a great experience. I was nervous about it because I working in private practice, that was very new to me, and
mhm.
but she was a great supervisor,
Yeah.
and I actually somehow ended up getting promoted to be a program manager. So that was new. But
Okay.
one thing that was helpful for me was at that time I still wasn't licensed on either side, with as a therapist or a psychologist. And but I somehow you came up on my podcast options, And so I started listening to you. And then when I discovered you were on YouTube, and I was like, what? She's on YouTube too? So I started watching you. And so even though even though I didn't have my own practice, I was
Yeah.
a part of one. And so the advice that you were giving, about having your ideal client, and I was like, I do have an ideal client. Like, oh wow, I can be selective. And because I was a program manager, I had the authority, to be selective. So I started implementing the
Mhm.
strategies that you were mentioning then, which helped me. Even though I was in someone else's private practice, I had
That's
that
right.
flexibility to do that. And it definitely made a huge difference for me during that time. But it was a bit daunting getting into private practice, but it was a great experience,
Yeah.
having that flexibility and working with the population that they did serve, and just being in that environment. It was an awesome learning experience. Definitely prepared me for, and actually opened my eyes to being willing and even considering having my own private practice.
Mhm. So this is what I want to do for students and for licensed providers, because I know I have a video on it, but unless somebody's looking for it, it's usually only viewed by our clients. So we created a video a while ago. I actually did it during the pandemic because of the level of increase in mental health. I had talked about the 3 levels of care. And so
Mhm.
just for the public or clinicians, the 3 levels of care, private practice is at the bottom. But I'm gonna do the 3 levels of care in private practice. So for providers, the lowest level of care is private practice, just because we're typically not on call unless that's your rule. Most of us don't go into private practice to be on call. So you have private practice, then you have outpatient clinic, and then from outpatient clinic, then clearly you go into inpatient clinic. Now, inpatient clinic can also be AKA hospital, or it can be housing or something like that, where you go in temporarily for like substance use treatment, right? And there's an end date or a treatment go date. Now, as you were talking, I thought about that as it relates to clinical practice. And so the reason I had asked, what made you go into working for someone else's practice, whether it was practicum internship or by choice to get paid, is that for someone who A, never thought about private practice until it stumbled across them, or
Mhm.
B, you're not very sure if you even want to be an entrepreneur. You may want the flexibility, but you don't want to do all the things yourself. I would
Yeah.
highly encourage you to seek out, with good intent of not trying to milk somebody for everything that they got and then leave their business, because I protect our group practice owners that I coach, because that's what they're in
Mhm.
fear of, is that someone is going to come in with the desire to leave in 6 months after they've indirectly coached them. So we talk to them about how
Mhm.
you can mentor them, but not, show them all of your systems, because you're running a
Right.
company. But from the clinician perspective, you could go into someone else's practice for a different level of care. So if you think about it, the jobs that we have would be considered level 3. You have no control over your schedule, no control pretty much over anything unless you got a super dope supervisor. But if you work for the
Mhm.
government, the county, it's not happening. Even if you work for the school district, you burnt, because
Mhm.
it's only one of y'all for 3 schools. So
Right.
that's level 3. Lack of control is usually why we leave, and income caps.
Mhm.
And then level 2 is the introduction to private practice, which I would say is someone else's practice. So you can see if you can get your ideal clients, or at least have a say so. You can maybe
Mhm.
choose your private practice schedule, or just have a more, as you mentioned, a more flexible and relaxing environment. If that's all you get, that's still
Mhm.
better. And then
Yes.
clearly the
Mhm.
the level 1 is still private practice. But I wanted to say that on the business side, because sometimes people just see private practice as, oh, I can make more money. And what we do in our, DTA community is really focus on mindset and systems. The money will follow
Yes.
if you have
Mhm.
everything else. But what we're talking about today really is, how do you make these shifts? Because that's pretty much what the theme is today. Like, how do you
Yes,
make these
yes.
shifts from level 2 to level
Mhm.
1, and like stay the course, you know?
Mhm.
So I know that you started with us with private practice. So let me give a disclaimer to everybody, because I do want to ask you a question on this. So
Okay.
these days, nobody has really wanted an online course, right? And DTA is not a course, it is a mentorship program, meaning you get access, but you have to make the best out of your access. You have to ask your questions. And Tanisha is one where she, with a good amount of other students, they definitely ask questions, and I love it. right? Because I know that they're growing with the questions that they ask. So
Mhm.
she, based off her schedule, everybody was unable to make our live calls.
Yeah.
However, we saw that she was watching the replays, which is, in online course community, very abnormal. I watch replays, but a lot of people don't, meaning no excuses. And so
Mhm.
what kind of mindset did you have to put on to know that I may not be able to go live all the time, but I still want to grow, so I have to make a sacrifice and like sit down?
Mhm. I was just very determined that I wanted to start my private practice, and I knew that listening to those coaching calls and learning from the DTA program and the coaches and you, of course, was like going to be the biggest contributor to me having a successful and profitable practice and setting it up. And that's one of the, like, what's really most important is being able to set it up in a way so that it can thrive. And so I was just really determined. I was ready. I had already had, after that experience in private practice and then kind of switching gears and focusing on my MFT hours. And so switching jobs at that point. But I I knew that I wanted to have my own private practice, and I was done with working for someone else or working in, within those systems where you have very little control over your schedule. And so I was just really determined, like, now is the time. I'm licensed now. Let's get it going. And so, but I knew that I had to fit it in somewhere. I didn't have the luxury of like not working at all. Some people may, which is awesome, but I didn't have that. So there was no way I could say, Dr. TK, I need you to switch the coaching calls to this day and time, so that I could be there live, which I would have loved to be able to, but I knew I still needed, there was no excuses. I still needed to get it done. And the only person it would have affected is me and delaying, you know, my work and what I wanted to get done and being able to serve the population that I wanted to serve. And so that's what
Yeah.
motivated me to get it done.
Yeah. If I could put a word on it, I would say, like, or a phrase, you linked it to your outcome. Like, you linked the
Yes.
action that you had
Mm-hmm.
to put into your outcome. And some people may
Mm-hmm.
link the action to obstacles, like,
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned, because it's on this day at this time in this time zone, I am unable to attend. And some people actually um, do not even get help in their business or anything else because they cannot fit that one thing. But as you know, we all know, like, even with therapy clients, right? Like, we're not a one size fit
Mm-hmm.
all. We can't cater to
Right.
everybody in every,
Mm-hmm.
situation. But at the end of the day, we know
Impossible.
that we put a good, and because I want to speak about this with how you even utilize the secret podcast, because
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
this is how you have been highlighted in our community and our newsletters, because we love to see when people are doing something different than everyone else, right? Because there's nothing wrong with
Mm-hmm.
showing up live. We love it, but we love it also when you are making moves in the background. And this is why we go
Mm-hmm.
ham, like in the Facebook group, when people pop up after months and say, I know I've
Yeah.
been quiet, I know I ain't did X,
Mm-hmm.
but I have been working. Or we see monthly accountability reports, but we don't even know the
Mm-hmm.
person. We ain't never seen their face. They follow me on Instagram, but I don't know who they are if they
Mm-hmm.
walk into me on the street. But once we start seeing your name, and see, that's the key.
Yeah.
Like, I love going
Mm-hmm.
to live events for therapists, and they walk up to me, and I always tell y'all, if y'all walk up to me, say your name, say what program
Yeah.
you in, because that little thumbnail don't do me no favors, and
Right.
neither does the
Right.
algorithm with showing me your stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you tell me your name, if you either are there, or especially if you submit questions, I know who you are and I know about your
Mm-hmm.
business because you are asking questions. And so, can you speak to, for the entrepreneur who may be parents, single mom, because we have a lot of women, or just
Mm-hmm.
you really at a time capacity, how
Yes. Oh
has
my gosh.
a new thing that we put in, a secret podcast, how has
Mm-hmm.
that helped you technically get personalized coaching because you can't come to the calls?
Yes, that was a big help. The DTA, the Q&A podcast, as well as the other secret podcasts for mindset,
Mhm.
and even the one for the boot camp that you just had.
Yeah.
The podcasts are awesome. I'm also a visual learner, but I'm also an audio learner. So I listen to it while I'm driving. I listen to it while I'm cooking, while I'm any household work. I'm always listening to it, even when I'm working on doing work at my computer, I'm listening to it. And sometimes I'll listen to it multiple times. And so it really makes a difference. It's very helpful for me with the time constraint if I'm unable to actually sit down and watch the video for an hour. Just being able to listen to it definitely helps me with being able to take in the information, and I'm still able to take some notes in my phone or in a Google Doc, depending on where I'm at. Is very helpful with just taking it in and being able to listen to it repeatedly or go back to a particular Q&A. Like I've been listening to some of the ones from last year that apply now to my business currently. And it's just been helpful. It's like whatever you need, it's there. In one of those podcasts or on Kajabi, it's there. You can go back and watch it or listen to it. That's been very helpful.
So before we shift gears and go deep into entrepreneurship and talk about what you're doing now, I just want to speak to two different providers that might be listening to the message we just talked about. So it really depends on what ear people chose to listen through. So one person may hear, oh, they're talking about DTA. The person that I hope everyone is that you're hearing the underlining message of the tools that she used on her own, not DTA as a tool, but her mindset as a tool, meaning I want this, so I have access to this, so I need to go in there and find this. Oh, she said that, everything won't be applicable because I may not be in that season in my business or in my life. But when I get there, I'm able to have, I know that you all have like upgrades to the portal, access to like updates that we do. And so something may apply that didn't apply when you first came in, and now it applies later. And ultimately what I'm speaking to people is being resourceful. As a provider in entrepreneurship, if you don't learn how to be resourceful, you're going to be codependent on being an employee for the rest of your life. And if that's what you want to do, not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur. That's fine, but just own it. Own that you're an employee or own that you are an entrepreneur, So let's shift gears, because I know that some of our conversations behind the scenes have been with you doing speaking and stuff like that. So what does your business look like now? Like, what are the things that you're doing?
So on the private practice side, I just recently became a network with One Health Insurance, Magellan Healthcare. So I'm looking forward to getting started with that. I do have one private pay client though so far. I've had a few months ago. I had two. It's down to one now. And then on the other side of things, with workshops and trainings and speaking, I have a training. So it's a few things. So I have a training that I developed while I was a social worker it was like a special project. And I did, after that, once I left the county, I didn't do anything with it. And then there was an opportunity that came up, and I didn't know about you at the time. I wish I had, but my husband encouraged me to submit a proposal for it, and it was accepted. And so then, especially after, hearing your podcast and changing my mindset, I've been marketing that a bit more and being able to request my worth for the training. And so, and one example of that recently is last year there was a county who was interested, but the amount that they were offered was not enough. So I gave my offer or my request for what I would, what the value is. They weren't able to pay it, and so I was like, okay, what would Dr. TK do? What does she say? So I said, you know what? I said, well, hopefully, it would be great if we could do this, and hopefully you guys will be able to find the funding. I didn't change it. I definitely considered changing my rate. 6 months later or 7 months later, here we are. They came back. They found another funding source, and it's scheduled for June. So that's amazing at the rate that I requested. And so, and I've also partnered. Thank you. And so one thing that is I won't say a sore spot for me, but that's like always like a little thing on my shoulder is that I'm not a fan of online marketing. So that's been a challenge for me because I'm like, oh, I don't want to do online marketing. So I've had to be more out, attending events and networking in person, which I do enjoy, although I'm also can be a bit on the reserve side. So I've had to push myself to do it. It's like, okay, if you don't want to do online marketing, you got to do something, like you say, you
Yep.
got to be willing to
Yep.
get out there. So I have been able to make some partnerships. So I have some upcoming mental health workshops coming up. I'll be speaking on the panel at my church next week. So I do have some things coming up. The online marketing is still, it's there on my shoulder. I'm still considering it, but I'm tabling it for now. But so
Yeah.
anyway, that's what's happening on the other side with training workshops.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and speak to that to you and whoever else needs some assistance right now. So when it comes down to online, because we've had people who asked us that and said, like, do you think that it's a requirement that you market online to grow your business? So the answer is yes and no. So I think that all of our clients are very intellectual and you can read between the lines. So we are in 2025. If I just left it there, you should think about what's happening in 2025. If I even
Yes.
said, how are kids doing homework? Oh, they have Google Chromebooks that the school checks out. Okay, so they're online, right?
Yes.
So would I absolutely say that you have to market online? The answer is no. That's the only part of no that I have. In terms of should you market online
Right.
to grow your business and to grow your brand? If that's where you start, because branding should come before marketing anyway. And some people see those as the same thing and they are not. So, and we talked about that in the boot camp. So when you think about a brand, your brand, everybody, is not your colors, your background. It is your expertise. What are you good at? So like if Tanisha goes and does workshops and trainings, whatever topic she has pitched to get accepted, to be on panels, whether it's 2 to 3 different topics, I am sure those 2 to 3 topics, as we talk about in our community, are still under one big umbrella of her big expertise. And then it has like legs, like a stool, right? And so you want to present yourself online as like an online business card, and it may be a reframe in your mind. So if you start thinking about Instagram not as, oh, I got to put something up there to get clients, versus if you think about if my clients go to, and I'm going to tell you the order, if they go to Psychology Today, and then, or they go to Therapy for Black Girls, and then you say, go check out my website to read more because you only had a certain amount of characters to put on these directories. So what do? They click on your website. And then depending on what age group, I know I used to serve transitional age youth, they for sure went to my Instagram fast. And that's what made them actually say yes. So they would click on something else just to vet, especially if you work with professional people, right? So if you think about everything they did, everything you did online, it technically was doing branding, showing what you were doing. It was your business card, meaning they see that you're active in the field. I'm trying to give y'all buzzwords because if you ain't posted it for years, you ain't active unless you on YouTube all the time, So think about it as a business card versus I got to be online, because that latter one is more pressure. And I don't think that you attract aligned clients or opportunities with pressure. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. It's a business card.
Right.
I like that.
Everybody else, if you like that, go ahead and put that in the comment box or DM us on Instagram.
Yes.
But just a reframe, because I know that question comes up quite a bit.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
This is a great business therapy session.
Exactly.
Thank you. It's a business card. Yes.
So let's speak a little bit more about the workshops and trainings. And so I'm going to give them a sneak peek into what has happened or transpired on our private podcast. So all of our clients are able to submit questions. Everything is anonymous. But Tanisha has went from asking questions around private practice and the logistics of starting into I got a private practice, but I'm starting to get these speaking engagements. And then I'm like, I told my team, like, reach out to her and ask her, does she want me to do a second parter to this? But I need to know what your goal is. So what I'm speaking to everybody is, you may have went to school for one thing, and then all of a sudden you graduated, like entrepreneurship, you graduated, and then you find yourself being more aligned and more opportunities coming in one area, very different than what you anticipated. Clinical service one-on-one versus one-to-many. Now, the crazy part is I didn't see it as anything negative, because my question was, well, if that's where you want to end up, then maybe this becomes part of your private practice, not 2 different entity structures. And it's a different way of looking at it. You just have an upper hand because you already have opportunities, versus some people don't even look for those until after their whole private practice is up and running, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so can you share with everyone what like general topics do you do when you do trainings and how that is related to what you like to do in your private practice?
Oh, yes, sure. So the topics that I typically train on is related to trauma and self-esteem, also self-care and burnout, and just understanding, being more self-aware, essentially, and providing psychoeducation. And so, and I do work with one of my areas of specialty is trauma. And so, with doing, when I am trained in EMDR therapy, I'm an eclectic therapist, so I utilize multiple modalities. But with EMDR therapy, I'm able to help with relieving symptoms of trauma as well as improving one's self-esteem and sense of self-worth. So there's two sides of it that are benefits of that, and just with doing trauma work in general because it does involve a sense of shame and all of those things. And so getting to that other side. And so with the trainings that I do, there's one side of it that's with more so with child welfare and in regards to working with African American children and understanding the history of trauma, more so in regards to hair, actually, hair and skin care. And it's not so much of a how to and more of a why it's important. And then on the other side, outside of child welfare, it's more so just focused on trauma, boundaries. That's another one that I focus on as well. Trauma, boundaries, communication, and self care and burnout.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
So
and
like,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say because my ideal client is our parents who are struggling with either stress, anxiety, even their
Mhm.
own childhood trauma and how it's impacting them as well as their relationships and their parenting, their relationships with
Yeah.
their children. And so with the trainings, I'm able to cover those topics and it may not always be with parents, but
Mhm.
those topics are definitely, there's a thread there. It's all
Yeah.
connected.
I mean, well, they're all definitely interconnected. And I think that sometimes when we look at entrepreneurship, we look at things very linear and not
Mhm.
in a flow. And so when I'm listening to what you say, and like I'm just going to imagine myself being in like the audience of one of your workshops or speaking engagements, right?
Mhm.
You may have a private practice running in the background, but I don't know you yet. But then when you speak on stage, first of all, everybody speaking on stage of any sort, I don't care if you speak for 5 minutes on a panel, it automatically puts you in the authority seat because someone chose you. Even if you pitched yourself, they still had to choose you and accept you as the expert to speak on that
Mhm.
topic. And I just need people to understand that. So this is why we say get on somebody's stage, even at your church, because that still positions them to tell their friends about you because we may not want to see people in our congregation,
Right.
So we keep trainings there. That's it. But what I'm
Mhm.
getting to in terms of it not being linear is that sometimes we think it's like step one, private practice, one-on-one clients, step two, speaking engagements, but they're not connected. Versus what if I have a private practice and then when I go speak, depending on the setting, of course, I let them know, hey, I also have a private practice, or indirectly, you tell them that you have a private practice. Organically, they're going to come up to you afterward and
Mhm.
say, do you have any referrals?
Yes.
Or if you
Mhm.
serve people like my children and they need support, I'm going to say, hey,
Mhm.
are you located out here? If you're in California, what do you do? Can I get on a wait list or something? It'll automatically position people to ask you what's the next step. And I just
Yes.
want therapists to hear that because ultimately what you discussed is what we talk about a lot, but I think that some people think it's more difficult than what it sounds like, which is this is who I serve and this is what I can talk about in front of a group of people. This is who I
Mhm.
serve and what I do in trauma. I could just take a little piece and like do psychoeducation. Because remember, y'all, the general public is not evidence-based practice trained in EMDR. And you will
Exactly.
not dare go into the public and train them on 50,000 techniques. You would
Mhm.
just probably even do psychoeducation on what is EMDR. Like that is it. And get paid very
Mhm.
well for it. And so I'm glad that you shared that piece because again, sometimes as therapists, we like overthink, we make things more
I
complicated.
do. That's me. That's me.
Complication
Yes,
leads
I
to
do.
overwhelm, and overwhelm leads to analysis paralysis, and that just leads to nothing.
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just imagine that, your younger self is watching this video and they're like, that sounds all gravy, but I don't think that I can even persevere the way that you have. What are some things that you would share with her to like keep her head held high so that she keeps going?
I would definitely recommend that she is patient with the process and give time to figure things out. Definitely seek help and mentorship because there are others who have walked the road and can provide great support, great information that can be helpful to save time, but also to help keep you on the path that you're headed on, and help keep you from giving up because it does get challenging. Like that's inevitable. The challenges are inevitable. You could have all of the strategies that are like 100% guaranteed, but there's still going to be challenges. That's inevitable. I would also recommend and encourage her to be flexible. So for me, I'm very much like I have to plan everything out. This is step one, step two. This is what I'm doing. And at times that it is helpful always to have a plan. And sometimes it works out, but then there are other factors that come up that are either unpredictable or that maybe I didn't realize might come up. But regardless, just being flexible and being able to shift and pivot and problem solve, which if you're a therapist, you are likely pretty good at problem solving. But when it comes to business, it's like we just kind of freeze or second guess ourselves. But we're great problem solvers, so don't shy away. I would definitely tell myself not to shy away from problem solving, and also getting help with solving problems as well. Getting advice on that.
That's so good. Like outreach, not isolation. Because
Yes,
just as a
yes.
reminder, we already operate more than ever after 2020 with those who chose to stay online, who had a practice before then, and those who came into the game and just said, "I'm just going to do telehealth. I'm not going to nobody's
Hmm.
business,
Yeah.
building."
Hmm.
Is you literally work in isolation. To my group practice owners, you still work in isolation unless you have a number two, which is a clinical supervisor that works with you intimately with training your staff. You work in isolation, you're building systems to then deliver to other people. And sometimes I think we get fooled because yes, we have the intimate relationships with our clients and or for group practice owners, interns, and licensed providers. But I mean, that's a 2-hour team meeting or clinical supervision compared to how many hours a week
Right.
building your business and
Hmm.
working in your business every single, throughout the month. That's a lot. And,
Hmm.
we can't do nothing with what we were told, like in therapy. So then we're isolated
Yeah.
again, because everything is
Hmm.
confidential. And so
Yeah.
I'm just highlighting something else you said earlier about self-care, because self-care is vitally important. And we would be naive
Yes.
not to like embed that into the Mental Health Awareness Month
Hmm.
podcast campaign. You have to take care of yourself and know your limits.
Yes.
Like you mentioned, you were in
Oh yeah.
school, you were in somebody
Yes.
else's practice, you were juggling a lot.
Hmm. Yes. And with
What
my
kind
three
of advice
little
did you give
ones.
her?
Hmm?
I said, what kind of advice did you give her about juggling all of those
Oh my
things?
gosh. Oh, definitely again to seek support and help. I have a great village, which was helpful for me because I had three little ones at the time. I gave birth to two babies while I was in my doctoral program. While I
Wow.
was taking classes. Um, Definitely seek support and help. Also, just thinking, like you mentioned before, just thinking about the outcome and the goal, the end goal. And that's what really kept me motivated because I knew it was something I wanted to do. And so I was just very driven and very determined to reach that goal and make it happen. And so I just constantly kept that end goal in mind. And so just like staying focused on that end goal and don't forget about that. And also seeking support amongst colleagues or classmates, whoever is those folks who are going through similar experiences with you, who are along the same lines, as well as others who have already reached where you are trying to go or
Yeah.
even past that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I want to say thank you. I learned something new, one, about all of our community members every time they come on the podcast. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. So that's always like so cool because it speaks to the depth of like why we need to always, like I say, commune with one another and not just rely on like
Mhm.
online portals and things like that. But if someone was interested in learning more about you, seeing the business card, or just even reading about trauma or other things that you do,
Mhm.
where can they find you online?
So I do have a website. My website is www. Well, it's Beyond the Basics Family Counseling. So
Okay.
you can, of course, you can Google that or go to the website, which is btbfamilycounseling.com.
Nice, nice. So what we'll make sure we do is link everything up in the show notes, all places that you can find her, and make sure that you go over there, y'all, especially if you're a provider or a student, go over there and show her some love, tap the follow or whatever platform you're on to connect with her, because, you know, it does take a village also to grow as an entrepreneur, and also to
Mhm.
mentor early clinicians into the field as well. And so I want to thank you from the kindness of my heart for coming on the
Yes.
podcast and sharing different phases and stages of entrepreneurship. And for those of you who are new here, my name is Dr. TK. We're all about business abundance and designing a life around your business and not the other way around. And so make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the audio podcast, and tell us what was your biggest takeaway in the show notes so that we can also share it with our podcast interviewees. You all have a great rest of your day. Bye.